Good evening, students. This is Teacher Brenda and welcome to my 10 Minutes Math channel. Today, we would be looking into the topic of time conversions. Okay, and here we are at part 9, advanced. Now, what I mean by advanced is really we are just looking into some of the units over here. Like previously, we have explored minutes, seconds to minutes and to hours, from weeks and days to months and to years. This is something that's quite familiar in our day-to-day usage. Okay, we use these terms pretty much every day. However, these three terms, decade, century, and millennium, may not be too familiar. However, they are still important for you to know. Okay, so what is a decade, what is a century, and what is a millennium? And today we'll explore that. All right, so let's move on. So as you can see on the next slide here, you will see the connection, the bridge, okay, between years. First, we'll explore years to decades. So here we have the conversion number. It's 10. It means 10 years make up 1 decade. So for example, if you are 12 years old, okay, 12 is made up of 10 years and 2 years. If I could break up 12, I could break it up as 10 plus 2. So these 10 years can be changed into 1 decade. And these 2 years will remain as 2 years. So you could write your age. Instead of writing 12 years, you can write it as 1 decade, 2 years. Now, sometimes we see a building, for example, it's 57 years old, okay? So how many decades is that? So if 10 years is 1 decade, okay, you just break this up into 50 plus 7. So every 10th of the year, you make it into 1 decade. So you'll have 5 decades and 7 years. Pretty simple, not too complicated. Now let's look at the questions. Now over here, very easy. 3 decades is how many years? If 1 decade is 10 years, then 3 decade means I times 10. And that will give me 30 years. Same way, 50 years is how many decades? I divide. If this one I multiplied from decades to find years, I multiplied. Okay, from years to find decades, I divide. Okay, so 50 years, divide by 10. Don't go and divide by some other numbers. Use the conversion number here. Okay, so 50 divided by 10, it's 5. So 50 years means 5 decades. Simple conversions. Okay, clearing up the picture, and we are moving on to decades and centuries. Now, in the same way, again, the magic number, the conversion number here is still 10. 10 decades, okay, 10 decades will make up 1 century. I repeat, 10 decades makes up 1 century. So if I have 20 decades, so if I put here 20 decades, I have to divide by 10, the magic number here, the conversion number, and I will know that I will get 2 centuries. Now, from centuries to find decades, if 4 centuries is how many decades? So again, I'll do the multiplication. What will I multiply with? With 10, obviously, because that's the conversion number. So if 1 century is 10 decades, 4 centuries is 4 times 10, 40 decades. Now, in the same manner, the conversion between centuries and millennium, it's again 10, okay? So which means 10 centuries will make up 1 millennium. Remember, I'm not talking about years to centuries or years to millennium. I'm talking about centuries to millennium. Now over here, 1 millennium is 10 centuries. 2 millennium is how many centuries? I don't have space, so I just put there in a shortened way. So 2 millennium will be 2 times 10. That would be 20 centuries. 30 centuries is how many millennium? Divide. Okay, divide by 10. So 30 centuries, 30 divided by 10, you will get 3 millennium. So 10 centuries is 1 millennium, 20 centuries is 2 millennium, 30 centuries is 3 millennium. All right. Now, if you can understand this conversion so far, so good. the next thing that we are going to look at is the bigger or the longer bridges, okay? Like what we have done in our previous lesson. Now, over here, you can clearly see now that not necessarily we make a jump just from years to decades to centuries to millennium. This is what we have been doing earlier. We were looking into these conversions, but now we can also jump from years to centuries. We can also jump from years to millennium. Now, you may have seen in books, or you may have read that people have told you 100 years is 1 century. That's 100 years. Or you may have heard of something called as a centurion. Have you heard of that? A centurion is a person, okay, who lives up to 100 years. Do you want to be a centurion? You want to live up to 100 years? Apparently, there is a group of people, I think, with certain genetic codes that allows them a very long life. They live up to more than 100 years. They call them centurions. Okay, so 100 years is 1 century. Now, where did they get this 100 from? You got this 100 because you made the jump. Look at the jump. Let me clear this picture. And look at the jump that you're making. From years, you are jumping all the way to centuries. You are skipping these 2 conversions. Where did you get your 100 from? You got your 100 by multiplying 10 and 10. Okay, that's how you got 100 years. Okay, look at the green arrow, and the green arrow shows you the conversion from years to millennium. And look, it's 1,000 years before you make 1 millennium. What is a millennium? A millennium is 1,000 years. For example, we are now in the year 2021, which means what? There is 2,000 years, okay? There is 20 years, and there is 1 year. If I broke this up according to its digit values, this is what I would get. 2,000 years, 1,000 years is 1 millennium, 2,000 years is 2 millenniums, plus 20 years. If 10 years is 1 decade, 20 years is 2 decades. Then, of course, I'm still left with that 1 year. So we are officially 2 millennium, 2 decades, and 1 year from time 0. Remember? In my lessons, I would have classes, I would have mentioned, we are now in time AD. It started at a point 0. Before that was before Christ. And after the time 0 is known as our AD, which is after dominion. Okay. And we are 2021 years AD. Okay. But Jurassic Park, all your dinosaurs were 65 million years ago. Human beings, 200,000 years ago. The Earth, 5 billion years ago almost. Okay, so that's how old Earth has been. Okay, we are talking about centurions here, but look at how old Earth has been. Now let's come back to our maths here, and let me clear this drawing. And we were looking into the converting of years into millennium, okay, making 1,000 years, making 1 millennium. Now, where did they get this 1,000? You look at the jump. You look at all the converting numbers inside. It's 10 times 10 times 10. That's how you got 1,000. You multiplied this number with this number with this number, whatever numbers you were jumping with. So the years went to the decades, took the 10, went to the centuries, took the multiplied another 10, and went to the millennium. And that's how you get your 1,000 years. Okay. Now look up here and you will see another jump. Look here, look at the blue arrow. If I could jump from the years to centuries and years to millennium, I'm sure the decade would also like to make a jump. It wouldn't want to jump just to the centuries. It would also like to ask itself, how many decades do I need to make 1 millennium? So if I'm going to jump here from decades to millennium, you look, the number is there. It makes 10 jumps, right? So it's 10 times 10. So it's 100 decades. 100 decades is equivalent to 1 millennium. Now, after understanding this, we will look into answering questions, okay? Answering questions that require us to convert, okay, these units of time, like this. Okay, let's look at these questions. Now we have here 50 years, okay? 50 years to centuries. Okay, so I'm looking at this yellow arrow here. Okay, from years, I'm converting it to centuries. So 2 tens inside, so it's 100 years. Remember now this number, 100 years is important. So 50 years is half of 100. Am I right? It's not even 1 century yet. If 100 years makes half a century, 50 years must be, if 100 years makes 1 century, then 50 years is half of a century. Say I'm 50 years old, that means I'm half a centurion. Okay? Now, what about 7 centuries is how many years? Again, look at the conversion here. 1 century is 100 years, so 7 centuries is multiplied by 100. So it's 700. What if you had to divide? Now, earlier was division, right? So you take 50 and you divided it by 100. And this is what you would get. 5 over 10 is half. Okay, common sense can also answer. Using maths can also answer. All right, now let's look at the second question here. Between decades and millennium. Look here, decades and millennium. We're talking about the blue arrow now. So look at the number. Again, making a jump here and a jump here. So it's 100. 100 decades makes 1 millennium. Set that inside your mind. 100 decades makes 1 millennium. So 50 decades is how many millennium? Almost like the same question. 100 decades, you make 1 millennium. 50 decades is half of a millennium. So common sense. Again, 7 millennium is how many decades? So if 1 millennium is 100 decades, 7 millennium, you take and times 100. 7 times 100, you will get 700 decades. Let's go on to the third conversion, which is between years and millennium, which is this green arrow, okay, which is 1,000 years. So set that in our mind and ask ourselves, okay, 50 years is how many millennium? So 50 divide by 1,000. Okay, 50 divide by 1,000, cut the 0, you're left with 5 over 100. So this is 1, 5 divided by 5 is 1, 100 divided by 5 is 20. So it's 1 over 20. All right, so you can leave it as a fraction. 50 years is just 1/20th of a millennium. All right, okay, that's how small 50 years is from a millennium. If I were to draw a fraction divided into 20 parts, the whole bar would be 50, would be 1 millennium, and this part, one part, if I were to divide this into 20 parts, you can imagine this one single part is 50 years. Your father or mother or uncle or auntie could just be 1/20th of a millennium old. Okay, so with that, we're going to do the last question here, which is 2 millennium is how many years? If 1 millennium is 1,000 years, then definitely by now it should make sense to you easily that 2 millennium will be 2,000 years. All right. So with that, I end the session for today. And if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Okay. So take care, guys. Till then, I will keep producing more videos. Stay safe and see you then. Bye-bye.